Mark Twain said it this way: there was never yet an uninteresting life. Such a thing is an impossibility. Inside the dullest exterior, there is a drama, a comedy, and a tragedy. Simply put, everyone has a story. I believe that too many people take theirs for granted. Some people never think about their story, their life story. Some people never process it, nor do people often learn from others. And even worse, most people never, ever tell their story. Over the next few weeks on the Wise Idea podcast, we are focusing on listening and learning from not just our life story, but from the life story of others and even those around us. We want to take our thinking about our own life story to another level. We want to have an appreciation for life in general and our lives in particular. It's hard, to fully appreciate parts of our life story, often while we're in the situations themselves. That's a thing called hindsight. One person said it this way: the historian is a prophet looking backwards. Arthur Conan Doyle of the complete Sherlock Holmes series said it this way: it is easy to be wise after the event. Oh, that's so good. Milan Kundera said it this way: we go through the present blindfolded. Only later, when the blindfold is removed and we examine the past, do we realize what we've been through and understand what it means. So simply put, we're going to evaluate our life stories. I ask you the question today: what is your life story?
Welcome to the Wise Idea weekly podcast with Christopher J. Harris, focusing on life, leadership, family, marriage, and the church. We are providing tools for our inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. If you're new to us, we release a brand new podcast weekly on Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Here's our host, Christopher J. Harris.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome again to another episode of the Wise Idea Weekly podcast with Christopher J. Harris. I am your host, Christopher J. Harris, and I'm so excited to have you tuned in for another episode, another week of the Wise Idea. Listen, I think about this podcast every single day. In one shape or form or fashion, I literally am thinking about or processing this podcast every single day. I don't take it for granted that individuals have become faithful members of our tribe, that individuals are engaging with our content. I don't take it for granted that we are having a continual rise of subscribers, that we are literally reaching over 22 countries, and I'm just so very thankful. I literally am in awe of what is taking place on this journey of being a podcaster. Well, we have been in this amazing series, this awesome conversation, talking about life stories. And we are literally learning from the life stories of others. We have had individuals on talking about what it means to be in the legal profession and yet have personal life, family, marriage, parenting challenges to come up. We've talked about individuals with mental health and navigating those challenges. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. We're going to learn from someone by talking about a book that I've read most recently and some of the wisdom that this person shared from this book. That individual is Mr. Ron Williams. And Mr. Williams is the chairman and CEO of RW2 Enterprises. He is on the board of directors for American Express, the Boeing Company, and Johnson & Johnson. And he is really well known for being the former chairman and CEO of Aetna, the health insurance or the health company. He most recently wrote a book called Learning to Lead. The subtitle is The Journey to Leading Yourself, Leading Others, and Leading an Organization. So, you know, when I read that subtitle, it just spoke all kinds of things to me. Learning to lead yourself, learning to lead others, and leading in an organization. That really covers four of the things that we focus in on this podcast. We talk about life, leadership, family and marriage, and ministry or the church. And that's, I mean, this book, man, is so full of so much practical wisdom and insight and business tools and business strategies that it was an incredibly insightful read. He talks a lot about his own leadership journey and really how he asked the right questions to inspire an incredibly successful turnaround at Aetna. When he came into Aetna, it was not doing well, and you can look at the history of it to see what the shareholder reports were and the performance and the employee engagement and the culture of the organization, and he literally was able to turn that around. And so we're going to just have a conversation on the kinds of questions that he mentions in the book that will help challenge not just your organizational reality, but your own personal reality. We're also going to take a moment and really delve in, and that's what I want to pick up right now, and that is talk about what he believes and what many other leadership gurus believe is the first obligation of a leader. The first obligation of a leader, and that is to know thyself. So when you think about your life story, when you think about where you are now, when you think about where you have been, when you think about where you are going, it is critically important for you to know yourself. In Mr. Williams' writing, he says that throughout his career, he's come to appreciate that being a leader is an ongoing process of self-discovery and reinvention. Shameless plug. I wrote a book about reinvention. It's called Temporary Assignments. You should get that book. I poured my heart into it. It was an incredible experience. Mr. Williams goes on to say that guiding this journey is a set of obligations or ethical imperatives that form the foundation of leadership. The first obligation is to develop a personal philosophy of leadership. If you're taking notes, you want to write that down. To develop a personal philosophy of leadership. This philosophy, he says, will shape who you are as a leader and involves understanding, number one, your core values. What's important to you? What are your non-negotiables? Number two, the standard of behavior for which you will be held accountable. Right? There is nothing wrong to being held to a standard as long as you know what that standard is. And then thirdly, the personal trade-offs that you are prepared to make. He says when you develop a personal leadership philosophy, philosophy of leadership, that this philosophy will help shape you as a leader and involves your understanding of these three things: your core values, the standards of behavior by which you're willing to be held accountable, and the personal trade-offs that you are prepared to make. Now, if I could be totally transparent with you, I got to tell you that notion of personal trade-offs is a big deal. It is something that we often don't think about, but all of us are impacted by it. With every opportunity to lead or to influence, we are making some personal trade-offs. We've got to reflect on that. As a leader, he says, you must be willing to do some serious soul searching about what you believe about leadership and what matters most to you. You must also spend time consciously examining what sacrifices you and your family are willing to make. You must spend time consciously examining what these sacrifices are. what are going to be the trade-offs? Because there will be some. There are going to be some trade-offs. It could be sleep. It could be travel. It could be whatever it may be. What are the trade-offs? And as a leader, as you reflect on your life story, as you think about where you're headed, it's important for you to think about this. He says, Mr. Williams, that is, that throughout the years, he says, I have counseled many young leaders who are on their way up, quote unquote, way up. These leaders are highly skilled and motivated to succeed. Yet, when asked what they are prepared to give to the organization in terms of their time and energy and what they are prepared to give up, they stumble. The truth is that in their quest to rise in the organization, they have not spent enough time reflecting on the demands of progressively higher levels of leadership and the toll these demands may take on their personal lives. For some, this lack of self-awareness may cause them to derail over time. And then he gives us a great example here. He says, for example, as a senior leader, you will think more often and more deeply about how to ensure business success and what to do when things go wrong. And this is particularly true in today's fast-paced and complex global business environment. You will be called upon to make tough decisions that will impact employees and customers. Successful leaders accept that, quote unquote, deeper engagement is a part of the job, and they mentally prepare for it. They mentally prepare for it. He goes on to say, in this whole idea, under this whole bucket of knowing thyself, that it is equally important to have an honest assessment of what sacrifices you and your family are prepared to make. Given the demands of leadership, your days will often extend well beyond a typical 8 to 9 hour day, which may mean less time with your family. It's important for everyone that you think through what trade-offs you are willing to make. And then he personalizes this and he says, I have worked with some extraordinary leaders who at a certain point in their careers stepped off the senior executive leadership track. They made a conscious decision about what was best for them and their families and their health and their personal lives. Rather than leave the organization, they took on new roles that allowed them to achieve a better balance in their life and still contribute to the organization's success. Developing your personal philosophy of leadership is a dynamic, ongoing process, which is influenced by your experiences over time. Successful leaders take time to reflect and learn from these experiences, your life story, which helps them grow as a leader. Now, to start you on a path of self-discovery, here are some questions for you to consider. To start you on this process of self-discovery, here are some questions for you to consider. What are your core values? As a person, as a leader, what are your core values? What are your beliefs about the role of a leader? Why have you chosen to pursue or accept this role and responsibility? What do you believe is expected of you? What are you willing to give as a leader? What are you willing to give up as a leader? What standards of behavior will you and your leadership team be held to? Are you prepared to make difficult hiring and firing decisions? And I can tell you firsthand that that's not easy. He goes on to ask, what do you value most in leaders you admire? Are you committed to continually and significantly improving your performance every year? What will be your legacy to the organization? As you embark on this journey of self-discovery, you will find that you are never, ever quite done. And just as you think, I have made it, there are new challenges just over the horizon that may require new ways of doing things. While some leaders see this seemingly endless journey as a burden, we can see it as one of the reasons that we became a leader. The first obligation of a leader is to know yourself. So in his book, in Mr. Williams' book, Learning to Lead, the journey to leading yourself and leading others and leading an organization, he shares some very valid and clear reasons for avoiding certain why questions. And he even introduces us to this concept about knowledge maps, which I want to circle back to that because I think that's a good way for us to land today's conversation. He says there's 5 kinds of questions, or like I like to put it, 5 families of questions that will help challenge your personal reality, your organization's realities, your life realities. He says, number 1, highlight the key problems. Highlight the key problems. Oftentimes, we are afraid to tell the truth. We are simply afraid to speak up and speak the truth. Not our opinion, not our version of the truth, but the truth. And when we do this, we are focused on the person, maybe even ourselves, rather than the problem. No, let's be very clear about the problem. And from an organizational standpoint, you can ask certain questions like, what are the barriers to our business success? What are the challenges? What do we need to do to be better? What are our customers telling us? On a personal level, what are the cyclical realities that I still battle with? Where are the places where I continue to run from? What are the barriers to my personal success? What are the fears that I continue to embrace? What are my critics continually saying to me? What are my advisors continually saying to me? What are my friends and family members continually saying to me? You got to highlight the key problems. And when we do this, we want to take the conversation away from focusing on people and focus on the issues, focus on the methods, focus on the assumptions that may be false. And when we do this, we don't have to personalize what we are engaging in. He goes on to this idea about highlighting key problems to tell us, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, that when we ask why questions without context, people will often get defensive. They will often feel like they are a child. So in fact, it is only when people are trained in the context of the question and the context of the person asking the question that they're able even to understand the why question. So only when the person and the environment and the context is healthy and understood are we able to get traction from asking why questions. He suggests that it's much more important for us to ask what questions. Number 2, clarify the facts. Knowing the facts versus knowing all of the facts are 2 different things. And it is important for us in our lives and in our leadership to clearly be able to articulate the facts, not with a spin, not with political conjecture, but the bare bones, black and white facts. And so we want to create a culture in our lives, create a culture in our organizations, in our families, where we focus on what's important and not spend a lot of time focusing on the minor issues. So in his example in the book, Mr. Williams, of course, Aetna is in the health care space. And on his board of directors, there were a number of medical professionals. And he uses this example where he says that he learned over time, medical professionals would say to him that there are endless measurements that you can take of the body, but there are a few measurements that significantly matter. Things like oxygen to the brain, your temperature, your blood pressure. Those are important measurements to take. And it's important for us then to distinguish between what is nice to have and what is necessary to have. As we talk about this conversation about clarifying the facts, it is very, very critical and important for us not to be driven always just by emotion. There's a place for that. There's a place for us to listen to our heart. But there is also a place where we understand and we clarify the facts. Why? Because facts are your friends. Facts are your friends. Facts are not the enemy. They don't have to be something that you run from. Facts can be your friends. So number one, he says, highlight the key problems. Number two, he says, clarify the facts. Number three, I love this. He says, probe the underlying story. And this is the point that really said to me and galvanized this idea that we have to talk about this on The Wise Idea. This is why I brought this conversation and this book to this episode. Because we have to know the underlying story. We have to be able to appreciate the life stories. And so it's important when you look at, there's this tool called a genogram. And when you look at your genogram, it's basically an advanced family tree, but yet it looks at the behaviors of your family. So if you look at your family tree and you discover that, you know, the last 6 generations back in your family on both sides, both on the patriarchal side and the matriarchal side of your family, that literally everyone has a track record of getting divorced, then that may be something in your history that you should look at as you navigate how you make decisions, the environment and the models by which you use to determine your relationship decisions. Because if that is not what you want as a part of your story, then you've got to change what you've learned. You've got to change your framework for this. And you got to make sure that you are not adopting the same framework of these others in previous generations and then taking that as your own. This is why we are having this conversation, this series of episodes about life story, because we want you to reflect on your own life story. When you hear certain phrases in an organization, learn what they mean. They may have special meaning, and it's very important to understand how those terms evolved and came to be, how they came to be. When you hear certain phrases, even in your own personal life, why do you react the way that you react when you hear those phrases? What triggers are those associated with? And so when we get down to the bare bones of not just our goals and our values, our missions, but we are also looking at our behaviors and see how our behaviors are either connected or disconnected to the story that has already been written, but also the story that is yet to be written. All of us, we want a sense of pride and a sense of engagement with what we are affiliated with and who we are, our reputation. It is okay for us to be concerned about what people think about us and say about us. It is not okay to be consumed about that. When we look at all of these dynamics, we've got to probe the underlying story. Where have I been? Where am I at now? Where am I headed? Number one, highlight the key problems. Number two, clarify the facts. Number three, probe the underlying story. Number four, suggest alternatives. Ask questions that really get you at the heart of, well, what could be different? We want to imagine a world in which what we may believe is impossible is actually possible. So if this is the goal, if the goal is to end up at point B, but I have all kinds of barriers between point A and point B, how do I not just accept the fact of those barriers being there? I understand the underlying story behind how those barriers got there, but now I'm thinking about all of my options and alternatives to get through and around and over, maybe even some cases underneath these barriers to still get to the destination of point B. What would have to change is a great question for you to ask yourself. But what do we need to do to actually accomplish what we are dreaming about? One of the things that this does is it also It helps you to address unspoken expectations in your own life and in the organizations that you lead, which then leads us to this point that I was making earlier, or that I just kind of briefly mentioned, that in the book, he talks about this whole concept of knowledge maps. And a knowledge map, I'm going to put some links in our show notes for you to go and check this out. But I think this is something that would be really, really important for you to consider doing in your own life or in the organizations that you lead. You're going to have to do some research to understand it better and to how to implement it and how to go about the process. But I think it's worth that sacrifice and worth that investment of your time and your effort and your mental space to learn about this. And so here it is. A knowledge map is a visual representation of the organization's intellectual capital. It is a process of surveying and assessing and linking the information and the knowledge and the competencies, as well as the proficiencies held by individuals and groups within the organization. It is the knowledge map. It is an ongoing quest within an organization, right, to understand or to help discover the location and the ownership of knowledge base and knowledge artifacts. It is where we learn the roles and the expertise of people. It is identifying the constraints in the flow of knowledge. It is literally building a knowledge base. It is building a knowledge foundation, right? It really is a process that we can use to identify and categorize knowledge within their organization in terms of the people and the processes and the content, even the technology and the tools that are used. It allows the organization to fully leverage all of the existing expertise that already lives within the organization. There are people in the organization that knows what's happening. They know what they're doing, and we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of the knowledge vernacular that is used. So everyone from the vice president of finance to the person who is sweeping the floors, they all need to have the same knowledge base to know how what they are doing fits within the overall objective, right? You think about this is important. It is absolutely and critically important. What this does is, y'all, it helps to create a organizational literacy. Now, we've thought about this from an organizational standpoint, but also in your own life. Who are the people that you need to be around to help understand certain things? But what are the questions that you need to be asking? In a business sense, the questions that you would ask are, where does the money come from? How do we get our revenue as an organization? Who are our customers? And sometimes it's important for us to have a multi-stakeholder dimensional approach, right? But when you think about this, who are our customers? Who are our stakeholders? How do we spend the money? Where does the money go? Right? And as an organization, at every level, you're creating a dynamic where people understand this big idea, so they would then know how their decisions impact the overall picture of the organization. So in your own life, how do you make decisions? Where's the revenue? How do you spend money? These are all very, very, very critically important items. In one example in the book, he uses that when he created this process to use knowledge maps at Aetna, that one of the things that was curious to him was that employees who are not involved in the finances, when they would hear the term retained earnings, that many employees assumed that was compensation that the CEOs and the corporate executives had as compensation to be able to take home. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. These are funds that have to be set aside for the business to be able to operate in the future. So even just having a language and a knowledge understanding of that helped to change the dynamic, even of the perception of people. So part of this is about creating a language. It's about creating a literacy. It's not enough to know what you know. It's important to make what you know also accessible to others in your organization. Husbands and wives, it's important for you to know not just what you know, but also to pass that knowledge, that information on to your spouse. It's important for us to know what we know, but it's also important for us to make all of this information accessible to others that are helping us accomplish the mission and vision, maybe even for our own life. So When you think about all of these dynamics, first of all, he says, highlight the key problems. Secondly, he says, clarify the facts. Third, he says, probe the underlying story. Fourth, he says, suggest the alternatives, work to figure out what your options are. Fifth and finally, though, he says, drill down to the basics. Make sure that you do the basics well, that your basic processes, that you do them well. If there's a process for paying the bills, do that well. Process for keeping the lights on, do that well. Process for ordering supplies, do that well. Process for making your big events happen, do that well. Process, whatever that is, learn to do those processes well. It's funny because when I thought about this notion in our own personal lives, I thought about something as simple as brushing your teeth. Now, in some people's mind, they would ask, well, why would you mention that in this context? Because if you've ever been to the dentist, unless you are just perfect in brushing your teeth, the dentist will at some point probably suggest, well, you may want to adjust how you're brushing your teeth because you're not totally hitting this tooth well or getting to this area well. You may want to adjust how you're flossing because although you're flossing, there's some areas that you're missing. What they're really saying to us is drill down on the basics, because the truth is when we were kids, we learned how to brush our teeth, but we then got a little lazy or misguided in our approach to make sure that we were doing the basics well. So that may seem like a funny example to use, but you get the idea. You want to do the basics well. If there's some core functions that are a part of your business, do the basics well. It would be like Starbucks running out of coffee. It would be like McDonald's running out of burgers and fries. It would be like Subway running out of bread. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. It's like a gas station running out of gas. Learn how to do the basics well. So, with that said, he had a few other very small suggestions that I think have a lot of leverage in them. He says, figure out as a leader how to make yourself better every year by aiming at or for about 15% improvement in an area, right? Think about how you observe your own life. Think about how you've received feedback personally, professionally, financially, in terms of health, whatever it may be, and then figure out ways to improve that a percentage every single year. The question was asked of him, what have you changed your mind about in the past 10 to 15 years? And I loved his answer. He says, I have learned, or my mind has changed about this, that leaders have to decide in various seasons what their leadership style and approach is going to be by themselves before they introduce it to others, so that they can have great clarity about what this looks like. Okay. There's some leaders who are value-based leaders. There's some leaders who are collaborators. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. At the end of the day, he's suggesting that it is very, very important as a leader to think about, how are you going to lead? What is your leadership style? So we have today, without actually having him on the podcast, we've taken the information that he's created, the wisdom that he's created and shared with us in book form and in blog format and in interview format. And we have had Mr. Ron Williams on the podcast. His knowledge and his wisdom and expertise and exposure to leading large organizations, to leading large groups of people is absolutely clear. And I don't know about you, but I have gleaned and learned today in an incredible way from the wisdom that he has shared from his books. I'm going to have the link to his book in the show notes. I'm going to have the link to his book in the show notes. Also, the link to his website in the show notes. And you'll be able to go and research that and look at that and dig into that some and just learn more about him. But I think today has been incredible. Just thinking about how we learn to lead in multiple ways and at multiple levels. Our announcer is going to come and share some more details with you of how to follow up with this podcast, how to connect with us on a whole nother level, how to engage with us on social media. And I just want to say thank you again for each one of you that tune in every single week to be a part of this incredible conversation, to be a part of this incredible movement known as the Wise Idea Tribe. Listen, I end every single week saying the same thing. I'm not going to start a new tradition today. It's simply this: live wisely.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the Wise Idea Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. We hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did and would like additional resources and information, you can find the previous episodes, show notes, featured guest information, and more at www.thewисeideapodcast.com. We also invite you to join the conversation on social media. The Wise Idea Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook. Find us at The Wise Idea and at our Facebook group, The Wise Idea Podcast. On Instagram, find us at The Wise Idea Podcast. Our host is also on social media. You can find him regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, all located at CJ Harris 1. Finally, if you enjoyed what you've heard, head over to iTunes and or Google Play and leave a rating and review for other listeners to find us. Our podcast is also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you the next time. Live wisely.